Sometimes like I have weird dreams, and there was a phrase in a dream. The phrase was literal obsceny, and I looked up obsceny, and it doesn't mean anything. And one of the tunes on it, or there's others as well that didn't make it, are phrases from dreams. Bartok's Sunroof was also from a dream. I have no idea what it means.
Can you talk a little bit about where you have lived and how these places are different?
Yeah. I've lived a bunch of places now. When I finished secondary school in Dublin, I studied for a year. In Dublin, there was one sort of short jazz diploma course affiliated with the Guildhall that you could do, and I did that. Um, and then I went to The Hague in the Netherlands and did an undergraduate and master's degree there. This was all guitar. At the time in The Hague, electric bass was not allowed or taught. So, but towards the end of my time there, I started playing it for fun, just because I wanted to be in rhythm sections. It was fun to be in rhythm sections and have a kind of a more rhythmic role in the music, which of course is possible with the guitar as well. But the way I felt about it at the time, I guess, was that bass was a way to do that. And then after being in The Hague, I wanted to move to New York and was sort of on the fence about it. It was difficult. I'd visited a few times and really liked it and played a bit and taken some lessons. But I had this sort of lesson with Drew Gress where we just talked. We never took the instruments out, just talked. And he said, if you are someone who feels like they can isolate and be in somewhere like New York and isolate and still focus on your own thing, then great. But if you wonder about being overwhelmed, you could spend a couple of years in a smaller scene trying to just have time to find your own thing. And at the time, I was going out with an Icelandic woman, and I liked a lot of music from Iceland, jazz-related music and non-jazz related music. And so I moved to Iceland for a year, which was kind of a nice break from jazz school. And there was even people there that were sort of openly kind of anti-jazz music. You know, there's a lot of people studying composition and into a whole lot of electronic things. Anyway, so I spent a year there, which definitely had a big effect. I took some lessons with Schoolies Ferris and then Hilmar Jensen, and played a little bit with Oscar Gudjonsson and some of these people who I really admired. And Jim Black was coming to Iceland a lot, and maybe Chris Speed during that time as well. Anyway, after that, I went to New York for a few months, made my first record, went back to Dublin for 2.5 years, during which time I got an artist visa and went back to New York. Then I lived in New York for 11 years. And then I moved to Berlin 4.5 years ago.
How did this whole Berlin thing come about? I mean, I know you play in Charlotte Greve's band Moon River,
Yeah,
and although that's a Brooklyn-based band originally,
yeah.
I guess there are some overlaps with Berlin. I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I played in Germany and Berlin a good bit with her over the years, with that band and with other kind of versions of it, because there was this project of her Sediments We Move, which was with the choir,
Yeah.
and then it was kind of Wood River, but it was with Jim Black on drums, and now there's a New York version of Wood River now and a kind of a European version, which is kind of doing both. But so Charlotte was definitely had an impact on that. But it was kind of, I mean, it was a lot of things. I felt that being in Berlin would make touring easier. There'd be some funding possibilities. Life would be more affordable than in New York. And my wife is from New York and all her work is in New York. So I knew we'd be back and forth to New York anyway, you know. So I've managed to keep those connections going.
Yeah.
But they were kind of the thinking, you know, and also to be a little bit closer to Ireland. I was just kind of trying to think ahead, like how would I like things to look in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and so spending some time in Europe just seemed like a good idea.
You did not start with a bass guitar, so I presume Was the guitar your first instrument?
Guitar, yeah, yeah. When I was like 7, just acoustic guitar, and then I messed around a little bit with the electric bass in secondary school because there were just musical events in the school where they needed somebody to play an electric bass and nobody did.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of like, it felt like a kind of a hobby, and guitar was a thing that I actually did. So it wasn't until towards the end of college where I was playing more electric bass where I realized all the things I couldn't do that I wanted to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of led to that being for a while my main instrument, and playing guitar on gigs, not very often, kind of project based, and doing some teaching on it and some writing on it and working on some classical guitar stuff sometimes, but basically 6-string electric bass being the main thing for, I'd say, the guts of a decade.
Wow.
And probably there was part of that was even a reaction to all the, if you spend your whole life playing one instrument, there can be maybe a reaction to some of the pedagogy, or I don't know, you can have hang-ups. So it took a while for it all to kind of even out. So I'd say it's probably really only in the last 8 years or 9 years where they feel, maybe 8, where they feel kind of even again,
Mm-hmm. So you equally identify with both instruments by now?
That's a tough question. Probably yes is the short answer. I'd say I might have more experience in diverse situations on the bass.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true, but I have some sort of a thing with the guitar because I started playing it as a 7-year-old, and so I have a friend in New York who knew me as a bass player. He'd only heard me play bass, but he knew that I came from guitar, and so he'd seen me play lots of bass stuff, and then he heard a gig where I played guitar, and he put it much better than this. But whatever way he said the thing he said, my understanding was like, from his perspective, the guitar felt very natural, and the bass, he kind of saw it, and it was probably true in some way, like trying to this sounds self-congratulatory, I don't mean it like that at all, kind of trying to transcend the instrument, trying to go beyond the instrument in some way, which might not be a good thing. It could be a good thing or a bad thing, but maybe coming to terms with it a bit. And the guitar, just if you've done something as a young kid like that, it's just kind of in you. You don't think about it as much, or potentially. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a battle, as you can see.
I'm curious, do you consciously play differently when you play both instruments, or do you just organically immerse yourself in an instrument? And how much do you think about, now I play the bass or now I play the guitar?
Yeah, I mean, for a while I had this feeling that they were just the same. There's no real difference, and they're just both members of the guitar family, and there's lots of other members of that family. And I've heard Schooley Sverrisson, who is a big inspiration, say something similar in terms of his approach to the electric bass. I felt that way, and I maybe feel less that way now. And I don't have this fully worked out. I think that they influence each other. In my experience, playing one influences how I play the other enormously, but sometimes in ways that might be difficult to verbalize. Because I think when you play them both a lot, there's things you take for granted, and if it's your relationship to music, you can maybe naively assume everybody thinks about this way, or everybody experiences it this way, but of course they don't. Everybody's different. And I read an interview with Mick Goodrick once where he was talking about that he was teaching a flute student, and he said it was true of guitar students too, where before he'd let them play chords, or even improvise on standards, he'd have them play bass lines. He can play a 2-feel and then a walking line, and with most of those students, he said that their relationship to the harmony and the form I think he said the form, but certainly the harmony deepened a lot. That they had a very different understanding of the harmony, approaching it from that angle. So that probably is true of how I relate to harmony on the guitar, but it's not really conscious, you know. And like, so that's one example of it going one way, of it going the other way. I think it probably has a big effect on how I comp, but I couldn't say exactly how, you know. But maybe an awareness, or hopefully like an awareness of space or register or density, or how much harmonic information is necessary, or how much do I impose on the situation. Like, that's always a thing of how much do I impose, how much do I react. So I think that they influence each other hugely, but it's hard to say how. When I'm playing them, yeah, I'm thinking about different things, I think, you know, because even though the same fundamentals are true of both, like I kind of think of sound and time as being the most important things, and then you could expand on what does time mean, what does sound mean, you know, feel and blending and all kinds of stuff. But they're kind of the core values. But the way that you engage with them, or that I engage with them, or try to engage with them when I'm playing bass, is probably a bit different than on guitar, because, you know, if I play bass in a band, assuming we're playing, you know, forms and adhering to some kind of traditional functions of the instruments, like, maybe there's not a huge difference between soloing and comping on the bass, you could argue, but I'm probably spending, you know, 5% of my bass playing life taking solos. The rest of it is your kind of deep inside the band, you know. And that can be true of guitar as well, but the role is way less defined. You end up soloing more, you end up playing chord voicings, although you can engage in textural loopy electronic stuff on the bass, it's kind of easier to utilize on the guitar. So you just end up, or I end up, occupying slightly different spaces in the music. So I might bring the same core values to those spaces, but there are like actual concrete differences in what you're trying to do.
It's evident in the way that you play that, you know, that you have embraced both sides really wonderfully. I'm very curious, when you started out playing the bass, and when you started taking that serious, because you've already been playing the guitar for so long, did you approach that like a guitar in a way, or did you consciously try, like where was your mindset when you first touched the bass? Because I know you're playing with a pick and doing all these things. There's a lot of things that you certainly have carried over from the guitar.
Like, when I got really serious about the bass towards the end of college, I definitely approached it very guitaristically, and still do in a lot of ways, but I didn't think of that as being a thing. I just approached music guitaristically. But at the same time, most of my big influences, or conscious big influences on the bass then, were upright players.
Like who?
I mean, at the time, of course I'd heard tons of like Paul Chambers and Ron Carter and Scott LaFaro, but at the time I was really into all these records that were coming out on Fresh Sound New Talent. So like probably like Reed Anderson and God, I'm trying to think who exactly at the time. Maybe Larry Grenadier, or it wasn't just Fresh Sound New Talent. It was also the kind of the downtown New York scene. Michael Formanek, and people that were closer to me in age, like maybe, or I guess he's I don't know what age he's older than me though. Ivan Opsvik, or maybe there was a Matt Penman record that I loved, I remember at the time, you know. And then electric bass players that I started to get into were like people that aren't super well known, like Schooley Sverrisson, Stonewa Takeishi I was really into. Even Steve Swallow came a bit later. Like, I wasn't coming from Jacko or anything like that. I didn't really know that music. So anyway, so getting back to the question, I approached it guitaristically, but without being aware of it. I remember being very conscious of, if I'm going to play bass, particularly with a pick, then I want to think about what the kind of pitfalls of a guitar player playing the bass would be and avoid them. So I want to really think about sound. I don't want it to sound picky. I don't really like the sound of pick bass. So I want to find a way around that. Because when I heard Steve Swallow eventually, it wasn't immediately obvious that it was a pick. It was just a sound with an attack I liked, versus hearing electric bass where you know it's a pick and there are qualities in that sound that I tend to dislike. Not always, but often. And I've seen videos of Carl Kay play with a pick where it sounds very close to James Jamerson. I guess there's that whole controversy who's on what. I think it's James Jamerson, but anyway, that's kind of possible with mutes and playing, you know, near the neck and certain strings and setups, and maybe playing with the back of the pick and all these kinds of things. But so I was really conscious of sound, and I was really conscious of time, of really thinking about time and feel and how to hook up with a drummer and be in a rhythm section in a really present way. And studying in Ireland, Ronan Guilfoyle had been a teacher, and that was the thing that he talked about a lot, about rhythm sections and bass players. And then the other thing that I was aware of was not overplaying. You know, I felt like that would be the next obvious thing, to be overplaying and just sort of jumping all over the place, playing chords all the time. And I'm not saying that I kind of didn't fall prey to any of that, but I was just aware, like, these will be the giveaways. So maybe try to like really address the fundamental basic core thing here, so that you're able to bring these guitaristic things into it in a way that feels kind of rooted.
Did it help you to know how it feels to play another instrument in that scenario, sort of knowing what you would want from a bassist, for example?
I think it did, but I'm not sure how consciously, because there was a time where I you know, because I'm a overthinker, where I would hear recordings of myself and think, yeah, there's things in there I like, but would I want to call that bass player as a guitar player? You know, and that's harder to say. And even when I started to play, like being in New York, there was a period where I was playing most of my gigs on bass. When I started playing more gigs on guitar, then I even thought about that. Oh, electric bass players that I've always liked, like, would I want to call them when I'm playing guitar? And I think the answer is yes, but it made me realize it's a really different thing than playing with the majority of people who play upright bass as a first instrument. Yeah, so that's a kind of a confusing one a bit.
Were you ever interested in picking up the upright bass as well?
I mean, I was, because I love it as an instrument. But I kind of thought, like, for a long time I battled between I should just settle on guitar or on electric bass, because to do both at the level I'd like to is impossible. And so I don't think that's true, actually, but I was concerned about it for a while. And so I thought, man, if you add a third thing to this, it's too much, you know, and the amount of work that I knew would be required to be at any kind of a level on the upright was just I mean, yeah, I would imagine a lot of work for minimum a decade, you know, to be even kind of able to show your face. So I just thought, you know, I should just, if I'm going to play the two of these, I should really take them both really seriously. And to be honest, that's still, I mean, I love both, but I would say it's a stress in my life, trying to practice both, trying to stay on top of both, trying to feel like I'm developing with both, and trying to relate them to each other, even though some of that's hard to verbalize. I think about it a lot, because there might be times where I'm practicing one more than the other, and I want them to relate, because I want it all to be transferable. And with that in mind, I would say the last number of years, I'd say 80% of my practice has been guitar. The last maybe 6 months or a year, there's been a lot of bass practice as well, but bass was more like, if I play the gigs that I'm playing and I work on the music for them and I do some sessions and I'm listening to bass players and thinking about it, I think that addresses it. But there was a lot of guitar stuff that I really wanted to get to that I felt I hadn't got to, or still haven't got to, so that took up more time. And even though on the surface that might seem kind of unrelated to the bass, it definitely affects it. If you're doing, like, you know, inversions of drop whatever voicings and trying to voice lead them through a chord progression. I mean, even though I might not ever play that on the bass, it affects how you hear harmony. It affects how you hear moving voices, and it affects your writing.
How do you approach composition, and are you more likely to use the guitar than the bass? Do you have certain tools that you use, maybe a looper? How do you write?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have one method for writing. I've tried lots of different things, but I'd say I use the guitar mostly. I use the guitar mostly, even sometimes for writing bass lines. I've definitely written things on the bass, including harmonic and melodic content, not just bass parts. But I'd say I write on the guitar more. But basically, everything is very much an ear thing. Like, I find that I don't really have like any systems that I use. I've kind of wanted to at times, like if there was numerical systems or serial systems or something, that would be generators of material. I would like that. But what tends to happen, regardless of how tonal or non-tonal the music is, it's basically just always just an ear thing. Like, I like this voicing, I like this cell of notes. I mean, of course, I might be thinking of a scale or tonality or a certain modulation or something, but it's really just trial and error, and it's always with the instrument. I mean, I've written things away from an instrument too, but generally the things that I feel most connected to seem to be written with an instrument in my hands, and it's usually the guitar.
On this new record, Obsany, you play the guitar exclusively, right? Where previously you have played either the bass guitar or the bass guitar and the guitar on a record. So I'm curious about how is this one different? Did you have a different approach musically for Obsany?
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to make a record as a leader on guitar. Just because I wanted to, I felt inspired to do that, but also I was aware that anything that I'd put out as a leader previously had been bass focused. I mean, there's other things that I play guitar on, but there's more. I mean, maybe nobody ever feels like their playing is really fully represented on a recording. I don't really feel like I've ever done a recording where I felt like, oh, that fully represents me. But I was aware that there's a part of my musical personality that I haven't really recorded, so I'd like to. That was one thing. I also realized that God, it's hard to say anything definite about musical things, but I really wanted to put something out that was like, I often had this idea about records. It's you're just documenting a live snippet. Like, I could just make a live album, and I don't disagree with that. But I like the idea of a record being a studio production, and that means certain things. So one of the things it might mean is not tons of solos or less solos, and the possibility of overdubs, even if subtle, that couldn't happen live. And then also I wanted to make a record that was pretty kind of beat driven. I'd like to make a record as a leader on bass that's more beat driven as well, I think in my actual musical life I've always played tons of music that's dealing with time, but then when I looked at maybe just a few years period of recorded output, I realized there's a lot of things that maybe it's not true of me as a sideman, but me as a leader or co-leader, that maybe are freer, or there's more rubato things, and I love that, but so much of my musical life is spent dealing with time and thinking about time and rhythm and form and harmony, that I kind of wanted to represent that. It felt like there was a bit of an imbalance had occurred, at least as a leader. I mean, playing on other people's records, there's lots of that stuff, and that's a thing I'm still thinking about. So I'm really happy that Obsany is out with that part of my musical life on guitar, and it would be nice to follow it up with something similar, or not dissimilar at least, leading from the bass.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I wonder, do you feel, because you've been in both shoes, leading a band from the guitar or leading from the bass, do you find it easier to lead from one instrument or the other? I sometimes wonder, is it maybe easier to lead a band when you play the melody, for example?
Yeah, that might be true. That would definitely be the thing that would make it easier. But in a way, playing bass and leading, you have more control over kind of not letting the ball drop.
Mm.
Sometimes that can lead to problems like overplaying, or, but there's definitely a power, I think, to leading from the bass.
Mm.
It's kind of leading from the back of the room or leading from the front of the room, sort of. So I don't know that I have felt a huge difference in the two, but that's probably also related to the kind of music that I'm attempting to lead.
Right.
Things that are more in one direction or another, more or less written material might feel different, I think.
I think so too. I mean, sometimes I feel that if I play music that's based on grooves and vamps,
yeah,
or if I get to navigate the form in a certain way, I feel very comfortable doing that from the bass.
Yeah.
But then playing rubato pieces, for example,
yeah,
being a band leader, playing the bass and having somebody else play the melody, you
have
to follow in some way.
That's very true. And I guess the tendency in my experience of, if you're playing rubato music that people don't know super well, very often it ends up getting played much slower than it might have been intended. Like rubato equals slow sometimes, which is not what you want. And then it can be difficult to fix that from the bass.
Mm-hmm.
But much easier if you're playing the melody yourself. People just have to follow you. And the same with moving through harmony in a rubato setting. If you're playing on a form with changes and it's rubato. Well, actually, sorry, I take that back. Sometimes, if you're playing bass in that context, you are the dictator of the bass, in a more literal way than a soloist might be. Because sometimes a soloist, maybe they're playing the harmony really clearly, but sometimes they might be playing tensions or kind of something against the harmony, so it might not always be super clear, particularly if it's rubato music that people don't know extremely well. You're always kind of trying to hear ahead. So maybe from that point of view, it's easier on the bass. But in terms of the pacing of a melody, yeah, I think if you're playing it, then it's much easier to kind of dictate that.
I wonder, aesthetically, what was your vision for the record? I hear a lot of different influences. There's a lot of experimental stuff. There's a lot of textures. There's some rock sounds. There's a lot of different things. What would you say?
There were no like conscious influences that I was trying to assimilate, but I remember a friend of mine saying years ago that a lot of contemporary jazz doesn't sound very jazzy in quotation marks, and so I've thought about that a lot the last number of years, like to not get hung up on a word like jazz or what that might prescribe stylistically. So there was no feeling of like, well, I like this hip hop record and I like this ambient record and I like this Afro pop thing. It was more just like, I like loads of different music and some of it's in my playing and some of it's in my writing or my ideas. I'll just try to just let it in, like not filter anything out basically, and not, like it felt quite unforced, which is what I would like to always be the case in my writing and playing, that whatever the language is or the approach is just kind of natural and honest. It's not not an affectation.
Can you speak a little bit about the process of the music, how it developed up until the point that you recorded?
Yeah. I mean, to be perfectly honest, we didn't get to play it that much. We had a recording booked in February, and we had a gig. I managed to book a gig, and then the next day we were going to go into the studio, and we had a rehearsal the day before. So it was like one rehearsal, a gig, and then we'll be fine for the studio. But I think it was before the rehearsal. Otis's wife was very sick, and they were in Sweden, and there was just no way he could come. 2 young kids, and his wife was sick. He couldn't leave them. So we rescheduled the recording for June. So we did the gig with a sub, Julius Gavlik sub. So everybody played most of the music. We did that gig. Then it wasn't touched until June. Then I can't remember. We might have done one rehearsal, like a short rehearsal. But then we went into the studio. We had 2 days in the studio, but we went in the night before the first day to set up. And there was some issue with the setup. So it took a couple of hours longer than expected. So we basically just got to rehearse. And it really came together then. So when we came in on the morning of the first proper studio day, it felt together. And I would say as well, all of those guys, maybe Peter especially, but all of them, Otis and Lucas as well, very much so, are really have strong opinions and really want to arrange things kind of on the fly, and were very helpful with like, let's play the form this way, or let's not have solo on this, or let's have the improvising work this way, or let's have an intro to this, or things that, like, one of the many reasons I don't always love being a band leader is I can be indecisive. I don't feel I'm indecisive in the moment playing with people. I think especially as a bass player, you have to, decide something, and that's fine. But in terms of, it's my record, what's the right tempo? Or who should solo on what? Or should there be an intro? Or should I do an intro? I'm not as good on that.
But maybe that afforded your players the opportunity to really play themselves, right? And in a way that made you open to be flexible for making changes.
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely. So, and I would always prefer that the band has input. I don't want to be dictator of the band.
So the takes that you walked away with, were those very different from each other?
They not as different as they could have been, because the music was so new. The takes were kind of, there was an element of them sort of coalescing into what they were going to be. So like in a way, the point we got to by the end of the recording, like it'd be interesting then to just play 10 gigs and have that be those versions of the tunes be the starting point. Because what I brought in, because the tunes aren't super prescriptive and tend not to be, there's not tons of written material, it could have been a lot of things. So it takes a minute to just find what it's going to be when it could be so many things. So I forget, like, what the classic thing is, the band does a million takes and it's the second take, the first take. I forget what number of takes we ended up using, but I think in a few of them, it was maybe the first or second take. But there were some of them where it was the fifth or sixth take, because it was just people figuring out what is it, or how do I play on this, or so that was sort of how they came together, with a huge amount of input from the band, for sure.
Great. Since you involved Peter, was he also involved in the production and post-production?
No, I had thought of that as an idea, but I mean, he's obviously super busy producing so much that in the end, the mixing process, there's a little bit of post-production, but it's all Nanny, who recorded with Nanny Johansson, because there's pieces that are kind of tunes, but then there was 3 things that are kind of more ambient, and I played nylon string guitar on, but affected nylon string guitar, and I wanted those to feel more ambient and different, and she did all the processing and post-production.
Great, yeah. So what are your future plans now for this project? Do you have any shows lined up? Where can people hear your music?
Yeah, I don't have shows lined up. We did this one CD release show, which was really fun. The plan is next autumn I'm going to try to book a run of gigs. Autumn or spring, or both, depending on what's possible booking wise. And the record now is digital only, but I might try and do a short run of vinyl as well, because I really like the artwork, Tracy Murray's did the artwork, and I think it would look great on vinyl. So so that's kind of loosely the plan for it. But it's streaming and Bandcamp.
I've heard you on numerous occasions, and I know that you have a strong affinity with effect pedals, and you just talked about the ambience in some of your music.
Yeah.
And I also listened to this record called Processes, which was a collection of iPhone recordings, which I very much enjoyed. You were playing a lot of bass guitar, but guitar as well, and using different pedals. I was wondering, how do you practice playing with effects? Is it, I mean, I imagine that the process is probably somewhat similar to what you did on that recording. I guess that was really interesting, like just hearing you play by yourself. But if you could talk about your relationship to effects and what you like to use.
Yeah, I mean, I've almost never really had a pedal board because I like to work with the same pedals a lot, but excuse me, but not necessarily. There might be 8 or 9 pedals that I like working with, but depending whether it's a guitar gig or a bass gig or what the music is, I might bring different versions of that pedal setup. So I'd say there's maybe 8 or 9 pedals that I use, and then there's maybe a handful of others that I use quite a bit less frequently. And that period where it's probably over a year and a half or maybe 2 years, it was a kind of a specific period of really working on sounds. And I had this idea, I read somewhere, this may not even be true, that Scully Ferguson did this, I don't know if he did, of having a catalogue of sounds. So I don't know how he did it, but I had this idea, I'll work with a pedal or pedals. Often I would work with the pedal on its own first and then I'd combine it with others. And if I find a zone that I really like, I'll take note of all of the settings and the order of the chain and how I got it, and I'll catalogue them that way. But I didn't. Instead, I just recorded them thinking, of course I'll remember. And now on that record, I have absolutely no idea how I got some of those sounds. I definitely couldn't repeat it. But the idea, the process was basically just, focus on these pedals and find something you like. And when you eventually find something that's cool, record it. And I never intended to release it. That's why there was a really creaky chair throughout, because I didn't even think about it, So that was a period of really focused pedal stuff. And I kind of go in and out of those. I had a period recently, which I'm probably going to revisit, with the whammy pedal. We're trying to play harmonized. You can use a harmonizer, but there's the pedal, maybe if the pedal's down, it'll be a 4th. You press the pedal up, it'll go up to a minor 7. So trying to really learn to use that, so you get almost kind of pedal steel sounds. So I spent a while really working on that, and I need to go back because it's a hard thing, especially with the bass, with the sound and everything. Because it can be my sound can be too dark to allow the intervals if they're too close together. But basically I tend to just focus on a pedal or pedals and improvise a lot and just try things. And then either find like a kind of an improvised zone like in Processes, where it's not really a composition but it's quite identifiable, or as I've been doing with the whammy pedal, I was trying to write some tunes based around it where like the tune wouldn't be playable without the pedal. They're kind of inextricably linked. And I'm only kind of at the beginning of that. But I tend to just kind of dip in and out of it,
Great. Simon, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been wonderful chatting with you. As always, great insights. Please listen to his music. And I'll see you very soon.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Great.